The room wouldn't stop spinning. That's the first thing I remember about that night. The nauseating way everything blurred together like a carnival ride gone wrong. I'm not a lightweight. One glass of wine doesn't turn me into a stumbling mess. But there I was, gripping the bathroom counter at my in-laws' summer barbecue, trying to piece together how I'd gotten there. My name is Lexi, and that was the night I realized my brother-in-law was trying to destroy me. Lexi, you okay in there? My husband Russell's voice came through the door, tinged with concern and something else, embarrassment maybe? I'm fine, I managed, though my voice sounded foreign even to me. Just need a minute. The party sounds filtered through the walls. Laughter, the clink of glasses, my mother-in-law Meredith's distinctive laugh. Everything felt wrong, distorted. I'd only had that one glass of wine, the one Chandler had handed me with his trademark $1,000,000 smile. Chandler, the golden boy, the successful older brother who could do no wrong. I splashed water on my face, trying to clear my head. When I looked in the mirror, my pupils were huge. That's when I knew. This wasn't just alcohol. The door opened, and Kimberly, my sister-in-law, poked her head in. "Oh, honey," she said, her face a mask of pity. "Maybe you should lie down. Chandler told everyone you seemed a bit off earlier." Of course he did. I gripped the counter harder. "Kim, something's wrong. I only had one drink." She gave me that look, the one I'd come to know well in the 5 years since I'd married into the family. The poor Lexi, always making a scene look. "Let's get you somewhere quiet," she said, taking my arm. As she led me through the house, I caught fragments of conversations. Never seen her like this before. Russell must be mortified. At a family gathering of all places, we passed Chandler in the hallway, holding court with a group of relatives. He caught my eye and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when a memory flashed. Him by the drink table, his back turned, doing something with his hands just before bringing me that wine. "Wait," I tried to pull away from Kimberly. "I need to talk to Chandler." "Not now," she hissed, tightening her grip. "You've caused enough embarrassment for one night." In the guest room, she helped me lie down. The ceiling swayed above me like waves. "Kim," I grabbed her wrist before she could leave. "Please believe me, something's wrong." She sighed. "Just sleep it off, Lexi. We'll talk tomorrow when you're yourself again." After she left, I heard voices in the hallway. Chandler's smooth baritone. "Poor thing, always trying so hard to fit in." Russell's response was muffled, but I caught the words, "Maybe we should leave early," and "Sorry about this." I wanted to scream, to run out there and confront Chandler, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The room kept spinning, and darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. The last thing I remember was Sophia, my cousin, slipping into the room and placing a cool cloth on my forehead. "Something's not right," I whispered to her. "I know," she said quietly. "I saw him buy the drinks. You're not crazy, Lex." The next morning, I woke up in my own bed with a pounding headache and crystal-clear memories of Chandler's calculating smile. Russell was already up, making coffee downstairs. I could hear him on the phone. "Yeah, she's still sleeping it off," he was saying. "I know, Mom. I'll talk to her about it." "Yes, I'm embarrassed too." I sat up slowly, rage replacing the fog in my brain. Chandler had orchestrated the whole thing, drugged me, made me look unstable, and somehow came out looking like the concerned brother-in-law, and everyone had bought it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "We need to talk. I found something about Chandler." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. 5 years of snide comments, subtle undermining, and now this. He'd finally crossed a line, thinking I'd stay quiet to keep the peace like always. But this time would be different. This time, I had proof, and Chandler was about to learn that he'd picked the wrong woman to mess with. I heard Russell's footsteps on the stairs, no doubt coming up to give me a lecture about my behavior. Let him come. I had nothing to be ashamed of, and soon everyone would know exactly what kind of man Chandler really was. "You're sure about this?" I asked Sophia, staring at the laptop screen in her small home office. 3 days had passed since the barbecue incident, and my hands still shook when I thought about it. "Look at the pattern." Sophia pointed to the series of social media posts she'd uncovered. 4 different women, 4 similar stories, all at events where Chandler was present, all experiencing the same symptoms you described. My stomach churned as I read through the posts. None named Chandler directly, but the timestamps aligned perfectly with charity galas and business functions he'd attended. "There's more," Sophia said, pulling up another window. "Remember Angela from the country club? She left town suddenly last year." "Yeah, Meredith said she had a nervous breakdown or something." Sophia's expression darkened. "I found her blog. She wrote about being drugged at a club fundraiser. Guess who was on the planning committee?" My phone buzzed. Another text from Russell. I'd been avoiding him since our fight yesterday morning. "You can't keep accusing my brother without proof," he'd said. "He's worried about you. We all are. Maybe you should talk to someone." "I need concrete evidence," I told Sophia, ignoring the message. "Something they can't dismiss as me being paranoid or unstable." "We could talk to Angela," Sophia suggested. "She might." A knock at the door made us both jump. Kimberly stood in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "Thought I'd find you here," she said. "Russell's worried sick. You haven't been answering his calls." "I've been busy," I said, closing the laptop. "Busy spreading rumors about Chandler?" Her voice took on an edge. "He told us you've been calling his business associates, asking questions." "Did he tell you what kind of questions?" I stood up, facing her. "About the women who've mysteriously fallen ill at his events? About the missing charity funds from last year's gala?" "Stop it," Kimberly snapped. "You're embarrassing yourself. Chandler built that charity from nothing. He helps people." "Like he helped Angela?" Sophia interjected. Kimberly's face paled slightly. "That's different. She was unstable." "Was she?" I pressed. "Or did Chandler make her look unstable, just like he's doing to me?" "I can't listen to this." Kimberly turned to leave, but paused. "Meredith's hosting dinner tomorrow night. She wants everyone there to clear the air. Don't make things worse, Lexi." After she left, Sophia pulled up another document. "Look at this. Financial records from the charity. Large withdrawals, always after major fundraising events." "Can we prove where the money went?" "Not yet, but—" Sophia's phone chimed. She read the message, her eyes widening. "Morgan just texted. She wants to meet. Says she has information about Chandler, but we have to be careful." Morgan, the family friend who'd worked with Chandler at the charity for years. My heart raced. "When?" "Tonight. The coffee shop on Oak Street." I grabbed my purse. "Let's go." The coffee shop was nearly empty when we arrived. Morgan sat in a corner booth, nervously shredding a napkin. She looked up as we approached, her face drawn. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "If Chandler finds out—" "He won't," I assured her, sliding into the booth. "What do you know?" Morgan glanced around before pulling out a USB drive. "Financial records, emails, everything I could copy without being noticed. He's been skimming from the charity for years, but that's not the worst part." She lowered her voice. "The drugs? He keeps them in his office. I've seen him with them. The night of the barbecue, I saw him take something from his desk before leaving." My hands trembled as I took the USB drive. "Why are you helping me?" Morgan's eyes filled with tears. "Because I saw what he did to Angela. I stayed quiet then, told myself I was imagining things. I can't do it anymore." As we left the coffee shop, Sophia squeezed my arm. "This is it, Lexi. Real proof." My phone buzzed again. "Russell, This time I answered. "Where are you?" he demanded. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I said, clutching the USB drive. "But first, there's something you need to see." The truth was finally within reach, but as I drove home, dread settled in my stomach. Tomorrow's dinner would change everything. The question was, would my family believe the evidence, or would Chandler find a way to twist this too? One thing was certain, I couldn't back down now, not when I finally had proof of what kind of man my brother-in-law really was. Russell's face grew paler with each document we reviewed on our living room couch. The USB drive contained years of doctored financial records, suspicious email exchanges, and most damning, a series of text messages about keeping things quiet after charity events. "This can't be real," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "My brother wouldn't." "There's more," I said, pulling up the blog posts Sophia had found. "Read what Angela wrote." As he read, his hands began to shake. "Why didn't she come forward?" "Would you have believed her?" I asked quietly. "Over Chandler?" Before he could answer, his phone lit up with Chandler's name. Russell stared at it, then declined the call. "He's been trying to reach me all day," I said. "Probably knows Morgan talked to us." "Morgan?" Russell's head snapped up. "You need to warn her. If Chandler suspects..." My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. 911, Morgan just called. C showed up at her apartment. "I'll drive." Russell grabbed his keys, his face set with determination I hadn't seen since this started. Morgan's apartment was only 15 minutes away, but it felt like hours. When we pulled up, Chandler's black Mercedes was parked outside. "Stay here," Russell ordered, but I was already out of the car. We could hear raised voices from Morgan's second-floor apartment. Russell took the stairs 2 at a time, with me right behind him. "You have no idea what you've done," Chandler's voice carried through the door. "Everything I built, leave her alone." Russell's shout cut through the night as he burst through the unlocked door. The scene inside froze. Morgan backed against her kitchen counter, Chandler looming over her, a laptop open on the table between them. "Russell?" Chandler's smooth facade slipped for just a moment before recovering. "Thank God you're here. Morgan's been spreading lies." "Save it." Russell's voice was ice. "I've seen the proof." "Proof?" Chandler laughed, but his eyes darted to the laptop. "Whatever they showed you is fake. They're trying to destroy our family. Like you tried to destroy Angela?" Morgan's voice shook but held firm. "I saved everything, Chandler. Every email, every transaction." "You ungrateful little..." Chandler lunged for the laptop, but Russell stepped between them. "Touch her, and I'm calling the police," I said, phone already in hand. Chandler straightened his jacket, that familiar calculating look crossing his face. "Think about what you're doing, Russell. I'm your brother. Are you really going to believe these women over your own blood?" "These women?" Russell's voice cracked. "One of them is my wife, who you drugged at our family barbecue." "She was drunk," Chandler scoffed. "Making a scene like always. Tell me, Lexi, how long did it take you to convince my brother to turn against me, to poison him with your paranoid delusions?" "Don't," Russell warned, stepping closer. "Don't you dare try to twist this." My phone buzzed again. "Sophia, police are on their way. Stall him." Chandler must have seen something in my expression because his eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" Sirens wailed in the distance. Chandler's face contorted with rage. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, grabbing his keys. "All of you." "Chandler, wait!" Russell reached for him, but Chandler shoved past, thundering down the stairs. Tires squealed as his Mercedes peeled away, just as police cars rounded the corner. Morgan collapsed into a chair, shaking. He was trying to delete the files, but I already backed everything up. "He's going to destroy me for this." "No, he won't," Russell said firmly, putting a hand on her shoulder. "We won't let him." Two police officers entered the apartment, and the next hour was a blur of statements and questions. When we finally got home, it was past midnight. Russell sat heavily on our couch, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "All these years," he whispered, "all the signs I ignored because he was my brother." "It's not your fault," I said, sitting beside him. "Tomorrow's dinner at Mom and Dad's," he said. "They need to know everything before Chandler spins his version of events." My phone lit up with a final message from Sophia. "Just heard from a friend at the DA's office. They're opening an investigation into the charity's finances. It's happening, Lex." I showed Russell the message, watching reality settle over him like a heavy blanket. "He's not gonna go down quietly," I said. "No," Russell agreed, taking my hand. "But this time, he's not facing you alone." Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for the first time since the barbecue, I felt steady. The truth was out there, impossible to ignore. Now we just had to make Chandler's biggest supporters, his parents, see it too. The silence at Meredith and Hugh's dinner table was deafening. Russell had just finished showing them the financial records and explaining the previous night's events with Morgan. Meredith's hand trembled as she set down her wine glass. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "There must be some explanation." "There is," Hugh's voice boomed across the table. "Someone's clearly fabricated these documents to frame Chandler." "Dad," Russell leaned forward. "Morgan worked with him for years. She has proof." "That girl always was jealous of Chandler's success," Meredith cut in. "And now she's convinced you both to participate in this witch hunt." My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Angela's agreed to meet. She's flying in tomorrow." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Kimberly rushed in, her face flushed. "Have you seen the news?" she demanded, holding up her tablet. "They're saying the charity's under investigation. Chandler's face is everywhere." Hugh snatched the tablet, his complexion darkening as he read. "This is your doing," he pointed at me. "You've never accepted Chandler, always trying to create drama." "Stop it!" Russell slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "Look at the evidence, Dad. Really look at it." "Where's Chandler?" Meredith's voice quivered. "Why isn't he here defending himself?" As if on cue, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered on speaker. "Hello, Lexi." Chandler's voice filled the room, smooth as ever. "I hope you're enjoying destroying our family." "Chandler, where are you?" Meredith cried. "Ask your daughter-in-law, Mother. She's the one who's orchestrated this whole thing. But don't worry, I'm not going down alone." "What does that mean?" Russell demanded. "It means," Chandler's voice turned cold, "that I have my own evidence about everyone. Did you know, Mother, that your perfect Russell has been embezzling from his own company? And Lexi, those prescription drugs in your bathroom cabinet, they're not in your name, are they?" My heart stopped. The pain medication from my car accident last year. I'd used Russell's prescription when mine ran out. "That's enough," Hugh growled. "Come home, son. We'll fix this." "Fix it?" Chandler laughed. "Like you fixed things when I was 17? When you paid off that girl's family to keep quiet?" The color drained from Hugh's face. Meredith gasped. "We swore never to speak of that," she whispered. "Well, now everyone's gonna know everything," Chandler said. "I've sent a very detailed email to several news outlets. Should be published any minute now." Russell's phone pinged. He looked at it, then at his father. "Dad? What girl?" Hugh's hands shook as he collapsed into his chair. "It was a mistake. We thought we'd handled it." "You ruined her life." Chandler's voice was eerily calm. "Just like Lexi's trying to ruin mine. So now everyone's secrets come out." "Chandler, please," Meredith begged. "We can still fix this." "Too late, Mother. Check your emails." The line went dead. Immediately, phones around the table started buzzing with notifications. "Oh, God," Kimberly whispered, reading her screen. "He's exposed everything, everyone." I opened my own email. There it was, a massive thread detailing decades of family secrets, including my medication incident. But something caught my eye. "Russell?" I grabbed his arm. "Look at the email header." He squinted at it, then his eyes widened. This was sent from his office computer. I was already dialing Sophia. "He's at the charity office. Call Detective Martinez." "You're not calling anyone." Hugh stood up, his authority reasserting itself. "This stays in the family." "Like you kept that girl's assault in the family?" Russell's voice was deadly quiet. "No more covering for him, Dad." Meredith began to cry. Kimberly sat frozen, still scrolling through Chandler's revelations. My phone buzzed again. "Sophia. Police are heading to the charity office. Angela's landing in 2 hours." "I'm going," I announced, standing up. "Anyone who wants the full truth, come with me." "I'll drive," Russell said immediately. To everyone's surprise, Kimberly stood too. "I want to look him in the eye when he explains this." As we headed for the door, Meredith called out, "Please, he's still your brother." Russell turned back. "No, Mom. Right now, he's a criminal about to face justice. You can either help us stop him or keep enabling him. Your choice." We left Hugh and Meredith sitting in their pristine dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of their family's secrets. In the car, Russell gripped the steering wheel tight. "The charity office is 20 minutes away," he said. "Let's end this." I nodded, watching the streetlights blur past. Chandler thought he could destroy us all, but he'd forgotten one thing. The truth, once exposed, couldn't be buried again. The charity office building loomed dark against the night sky, except for one illuminated window on the 3rd floor. Police cars lined the street, their lights silent but spinning. "He's still up there," Detective Martinez met us at the entrance. "We've got the building surrounded, but he's refusing to come out." "Let me talk to him." Russell stepped forward, but the detective shook her head. "He's demanding to speak with Lexi, alone." "Absolutely not." Russell grabbed my arm. "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "But I want to wait for Angela first." As if on cue, Sophia's car pulled up. Angela stepped out, looking smaller than I remembered, but her jaw was set with determination. "I brought everything," she said, clutching a manila envelope. "Police reports I never filed. Hospital records, everything." A crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Detective Martinez grabbed her radio. "He's destroying evidence," I said. "We need to go up now." "I'm coming with you." Angela stepped forward. "Me too," Kimberly said quietly. When we all turned to look at her, she lifted her chin. "I need to see who my brother really is." The detective nodded to her officers, and we moved toward the elevator. Russell caught my arm. "Be careful," he whispered. "He's cornered now. That makes him dangerous." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened to the 3rd floor, we could hear Chandler moving around his office, the sound of papers shredding. "Stay behind me," Detective Martinez whispered, drawing her weapon. We approached the office door. Through the glass, I could see Chandler feeding documents into a shredder, his usually perfect hair disheveled, suit jacket discarded. "Chandler," I called out, "open the door." He looked up, that familiar calculating smile spreading across his face. "Lexi? And Angela too? What a reunion." He hit the door lock release. Detective Martinez entered first, weapon raised. "Step away from the shredder." "Of course." Chandler raised his hands, still smiling. "Though I'm afraid most of the interesting documents are already gone." "Not all of them." Angela stepped forward, holding up her envelope. "I kept everything." The smile flickered. Angela? Angela? Still holding on to the past? We both know nobody believed you then. Why would they now? Because now there's proof. Kimberly's voice cracked as she held up her phone, displaying the email thread. How could you, Chandler? All these women? Please, he scoffed. They wanted to be part of this world. I just showed them the cost of admission. By drugging them? I stepped closer. By destroying their reputations when they threatened to expose you? You were all so eager to believe the worst. He turned to the window. A few pills, a few rumors, and your perfect lives crumbled. It was almost too easy. Until now, Angela said firmly. Chandler's shoulders tensed. You think this changes anything? Dad will hire the best lawyers. The family will close ranks. They always do. Not this time. Kimberly's voice was steel. I've already sent everything to the board of directors. Your resignation letter goes out tomorrow. He spun around, mask finally cracking. You wouldn't dare. I made you who you are. No. She stepped back. You made me complicit. That ends tonight. More officers entered the office. Detective Martinez moved forward with handcuffs. Chandler Moore, you're under arrest. He lunged suddenly, not toward the detective, but at me. His hands found my throat as we crashed into the desk. You ruined everything, he snarled. Everything happened at once. Officers shouting, Angela screaming, Kimberly crying out. Then Russell's voice cut through the chaos. Get away from my wife! The pressure on my throat vanished as Russell tackled his brother. They hit the ground hard, years of brotherly trust shattering like the glass beneath them. Officers pulled them apart, Chandler now truly disheveled, blood trickling from his lip. As they cuffed him, he started laughing. You still don't get it, do you? He looked at each of us. I'm not the villain here. I just played by the rules our parents taught us. Appearances matter more than truth. Power matters more than people. No, Russell said quietly. You're exactly the villain, and now everyone will know it. As they led Chandler away, he called over his shoulder. Better watch your back, Lexi. Family secrets have a way of destroying everyone they touch. Detective Martinez touched my arm. We'll need statements from all of you. I nodded, rubbing my throat. Through the window, I could see more police cars arriving, news vans following close behind. By morning, everything would be public. Are you okay? Russell pulled me close. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. Angela and Kimberly stood together by the shredder, picking up scattered papers. The night wasn't over. There would be statements to give, questions to answer, family to face. But watching Chandler's perfectly crafted world crumble around him, that made every moment worth it. The morning headlines hit like a tsunami. Prominent charity director arrested. Family empire crumbles. Years of abuse exposed. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Turn off the TV, Russell said, walking into our living room where the news played on repeat. We've seen enough. Your parents called again, I said, showing him the missed calls. 15 times since breakfast. They can wait. The DA wants to meet with us in an hour. A knock at the door made us both jump. Kimberly stood there, looking exhausted. Mom and Dad are at the police station, she said, stepping inside. They're trying to post bail. Of course they are, Russell muttered. That's not all. Kimberly pulled out her tablet. 3 more women have come forward since last night. The story's everywhere. My phone rang. Sophia. Angela's interview just went live, she said when I answered. You need to see this. We huddled around Kimberly's tablet, watching Angela speak directly to the camera, her voice steady. I was 22 when Chandler first targeted me, she said. He waited until I was vulnerable, isolated, made everyone think I was unstable, and he didn't just do it to me. The interview cut to footage of Chandler being led out of the charity office in handcuffs, then to photos of his previous victims. "Turn it off," Russell said hoarsely. Another knock, this time Detective Martinez with Morgan. "We found something in the office safe," the detective said, holding up a small black book. Names, dates, amounts. He kept records of everything, including blackmail, Morgan added. He had dirt on everyone who could expose him. That's why he was so confident, I realized. He thought he was untouchable. "The DA's pushing for maximum charges," Detective Martinez continued. "But we need you all to testify." "I'll do it," Kimberly said immediately. "I enabled him for too long." My phone buzzed again, Meredith calling. This time I answered. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "To your family?" "How could you protect him all these years?" I shot back. "How many lives did he ruin while you looked the other way?" "You don't understand," she pleaded. "We did what we had to." "No," Russell took the phone. "You did what was easy, and now you're still trying to protect him instead of his victims. We're done, Mom. Don't call again." He hung up, hands shaking. "The press is outside your parents' house," Morgan said softly. "They're asking about the girl from when Chandler was 17. She's coming forward too," Detective Martinez added. "Says she's tired of carrying the secret." Russell sank onto the couch. "I should have seen it. All those years." "We all should have," Kimberly sat beside him. "But he was good at making us see what he wanted." Another buzz, a text from Angela. "Thank you for believing me, for all of us." The DA's office was a fortress of activity when we arrived. Phones ringing, people rushing between offices, papers everywhere. "The charity board's cooperating fully," the DA told us in her office. "They're turning over everything, but we need to move fast. Your parents have hired 3 separate law firms." "What do you need from us?" I asked. "Everything. Every detail, every incident, every cover-up you witnessed. Chandler's going down, but we need to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." As she spoke, her assistant rushed in. "Ma'am, you need to see this." He handed her a phone. A video was playing, Chandler in his holding cell, speaking directly to the camera. "If I'm going down," he said, his familiar smile now twisted with malice, "I'm taking everyone with me. Every secret, every lie, every dirty deal this family's ever made. By the time I'm done, there won't be anything left to salvage." The DA looked up. "This just went viral. He must have had someone smuggle in a phone." Russell stood. "Let him talk. No more secrets, no more cover-ups. Whatever he says, we face it together." My phone lit up with a message from Sophia. "Hugh's at the hospital. Apparent heart attack after seeing the video." Kimberly gasped when I showed them. "We need to go." "No," Russell said firmly. "We need to finish this. Dad made his choice a long time ago." The DA nodded. "Let's get your statements now. Whatever Chandler releases next, we'll be ready." As we followed her to the conference room, I caught a glimpse of the news playing in the lobby. Chandler's booking photo stared back. That smug smile finally replaced with something else. Fear. Good, I thought. Let him feel what his victims felt. Let him finally face the consequences of his actions. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time, the truth was on our side. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters as we made our way inside for Chandler's bail hearing. 3 weeks had passed since his arrest, and the scandal had only grown. "Ms. Lawson," they shouted, "what's your response to Chandler's latest allegations? Did you know about the offshore accounts? Is it true your father-in-law's condition is critical?" Russell gripped my hand tighter as we pushed through. Inside, Angela and Morgan waited with our lawyer. "He's already here," Morgan whispered, "and Meredith's with him." The courtroom was standing room only. Chandler sat at the defense table, still wearing his expensive suit, but his usual polish had faded. Meredith sat directly behind him, her face drawn. "All rise," the bailiff called. As the judge entered, I caught Chandler staring at me. His lips curved into that familiar smirk, and he mouthed two words. "Watch this." The proceedings began normally enough. The prosecution outlined the charges: drugging, financial fraud, blackmail. Then Chandler's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client would like to address the court." The judge peered over her glasses. Unusual at a bail hearing, but proceed. Chandler stood straightening his tie. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to confess." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. His lawyer grabbed his arm, but Chandler shook him off. "Not to these ridiculous charges," he continued, "but to the real crime here, the systematic corruption of an entire family." "Objection!" The prosecutor jumped up. "Let him speak," the judge said, looking intrigued. Chandler turned to face the gallery. "My dear sister-in-law Lexi thinks she's exposed some great truth, but she's only scratched the surface. Shall we talk about how my father built his empire? How many people he destroyed?" "Chandler, please," Meredith whispered. "Or how about my brother Russell? So righteous now. But where did he think the money for his startup really came from?" Russell tensed beside me. "And Lexi." Chandler's eyes found mine. "Sweet, innocent Lexi. Did you tell them about the real reason you left your last job? About the married man?" "That's enough," Russell stood. "Order." The judge banged her gavel. "I have proof of everything," Chandler announced. "Documents, recordings, photographs. I protected this family for years, covered every dirty secret. And this is how they repay me?" "Your Honor," his lawyer interrupted. "My client is clearly under stress." "I'm clearly the only honest one here," Chandler shouted. "Every accusation against me, they knew. They all knew. Ask my mother about the trust fund she set up for my victims. Ask my father about—" "Stop," Meredith cried out, standing. "Please, I'll tell them everything." The courtroom froze. Chandler's smirk faltered. "Mrs. Moore?" The judge leaned forward. Meredith's voice shook. "The trust fund is real. We knew what he was doing. We thought we could control it, contain it. Hugh said it was better to handle things quietly." "Mom, shut up," Chandler hissed. "No." She straightened her spine. "I'm done protecting you. I'm done destroying other families to save our reputation." She turned to Angela. "I'm so sorry. We should have stopped him years ago." Chandler lunged at the barrier separating him from his mother. "You stupid woman. Do you know what you've done?" Officers rushed to restrain him as he thrashed and shouted, "I'll destroy you all. Every last secret, every lie." Bail denied. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "And add witness intimidation to the charges." As they led Chandler away, he locked eyes with me one last time. The smirk was gone, replaced by pure hatred. Outside, reporters swarmed again, but this time Meredith stepped forward. "I have a statement to make," she said clearly, "about everything." "Mom, don't," Kimberly pleaded. "It's time," Meredith replied. "The truth isn't just what Chandler decides to reveal anymore." As she began speaking to the press, Russell pulled me aside. "What he said about your last job, it wasn't true," I said firmly. "But there will be more lies. He's not done yet." "Doesn't matter." Russell squeezed my hand. "We face whatever comes next together." My phone buzzed. "Sophia, Hugh's awake. He's asking for Russell." I showed him the message. "You should go. We should go," he corrected. "No more divisions in this family. We either heal together or break together." As we left the courthouse, I watched Meredith still speaking to the reporters, tears streaming down her face but voice steady. Behind her, Angela and Morgan stood supportive, united. Even Kimberly had joined them. Chandler had tried to break us with secrets and lies. Instead, he'd forced us to face the truth, all of it, ugly and raw and necessary. The healing could finally begin. The verdict took less than 2 hours. I sat between Russell and Angela as the jury foreman stood, holding the piece of paper that would end this chapter of our lives. On all counts, we find the defendant guilty. Chandler didn't flinch. He'd spent the entire trial wearing that same calculated smile, even as victim after victim testified against him, even as his own mother detailed decades of cover-ups. The judge's voice cut through the courtroom. The defendant will rise for sentencing. As Chandler stood, he turned to face us. Gone was the polished charm, replaced by cold hatred. Would the defendant like to make a statement before sentencing? The judge asked. Only this, Chandler's voice carried clearly. You think this ends here? You think you've won? Everything I said about this family was true. They're no better than me. They're just better at hiding it. That's enough, the judge interrupted. Based on the severity and duration of your crimes, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison. The gallery erupted in whispers. Hugh, attending court for the first time since his heart attack, gripped Meredith's hand. Additionally, the judge continued, you are ordered to pay restitution to your victims and the charity. Your assets will be seized. You can't touch my assets, Chandler sneered. They're all offshore. Actually, Morgan stood up. The board already found them. Every account, every transfer. It's all being returned. For the first time, Chandler's smile cracked. As officers approached to take him away, he locked eyes with me. Enjoy your perfect little family, Lexi. Just remember, you're all still lying to each other. Some secrets never die. You're wrong, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We're done with secrets. The officers led him out. The last thing we saw was his face contorting with rage as the doors closed behind him. Outside the courthouse, Hugh approached me slowly, leaning on his cane. Lexi, his voice was rough. I owe you an apology. All these years, I thought I was protecting my family. Instead, I was protecting a monster. We all have to live with what we enabled, Meredith added softly. But thanks to you, no one else will be hurt. Angela stepped forward. The foundation's being restructured. We're turning it into a support network for abuse survivors. Will you help us? Of course, I said, as Russell wrapped an arm around me. Kimberly joined us, holding up her phone. Chandler's last attempt at revenge just backfired. Those offshore accounts he mentioned, they've led investigators to 3 other predators in his circle. They're being arrested now. Good, Russell said firmly. Let them all face justice. My phone buzzed, Sophia sending a photo. The charity's new sign was being installed. The Phoenix Foundation, rising from ashes. It's perfect, Morgan smiled, looking at the image. A fresh start. Hugh cleared his throat. There's something else we need to discuss. The family estate? Dad, you don't have to, Russell began. Yes, I do, Hugh interrupted. I'm turning it into a shelter, a safe place for people escaping situations like what my own son created. It's time this family's wealth helped people instead of hiding crimes. Tears streamed down Meredith's face as she hugged him. A reporter approached, microphone ready, but Angela stepped between us. No more stories today, she said firmly. This family's done being headline news. As we walked down the courthouse steps together, victims and enablers, protectors and protected, all trying to heal, I felt lighter than I had in months. You know, Russell said quietly, Chandler was right about one thing. We're not perfect. No, I agreed, but we're trying to be better. That's what matters. Kimberly linked arms with me. So, family dinner tonight? No secrets, no lies, just family? I'd like that, I smiled. Behind us, the courthouse doors opened again. More victims emerged, supporting each other, finally free to tell their stories. Morgan and Angela went to greet them, offering welcome packages from the Phoenix Foundation. The truth hadn't destroyed us like Chandler promised. It had freed us. Every exposed secret, every painful confession had torn down the walls we'd built around ourselves. "Ready to go home?" Russell asked. I looked at our gathered family, not perfect, not unbroken, but real and honest at last. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." We walked away from the courthouse together, leaving behind the shadows of secrets and the weight of silence. Ahead of us lay something harder, but infinitely more valuable: the truth in all its messy, healing glory. And this time, we'd face it together.
I guess I always knew my mother didn't want me. Not in the way most kids wonder about it sometimes. I mean, she really, actively didn't want me around. Even my earliest memories are tainted by her absence and indifference. "Emily, sweetie, mommy's going out tonight. Jessica will watch you," she'd say, already halfway out the door in her designer clothes, not even waiting for my response. Jessica was just one in an endless parade of babysitters who kept me company while my mother lived her life without me. I remember my 7th birthday. Dad had planned this whole special breakfast, pancakes with whipped cream and sprinkles, my favorite. He'd gotten up early to make everything perfect before heading to work at his construction supply store. Mom was supposed to take me to the party place later that day. All my classmates were invited. I sat in my party dress for hours, waiting. She never showed up. When Dad got home that evening and found me still sitting there, trying not to cry, his face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "Where the hell is your mother?" he demanded, pulling out his phone. I could hear her voicemail message playing over and over as he tried calling. Finally, around 8 p.m., she breezed in, shopping bags in hand. Oh my God, was that today? I completely forgot. I was at the salon, and then Sarah called about this amazing sale. Dad cut her off. "Our daughter's birthday party, Helen." "You forgot our daughter's birthday party." "Don't be so dramatic, Robert." "We can reschedule it," she said, rolling her eyes as she headed upstairs. "Emily understands, don't you, sweetie?" I slipped away to my room during their argument, hugging my knees to my chest. Even then, I knew this wasn't normal. Other moms didn't forget their kids' birthdays. Other moms didn't spend more time with their friends than their children. Other moms showed up for school events and parent-teacher conferences, things my mother considered boring and beneath her. But I had Dad, and he was enough. He made up for her absence in every way he could. Despite running his store, he always found time for me. He'd wake up early to make my breakfast, help me with homework in the evenings, and on weekends, we'd have our special daddy-daughter adventures, trips to the park, movies, or just hanging out at home building pillow forts. I learned to stop expecting anything from my mother. When she forgot to pick me up from school, I'd call Dad. When she missed my school plays, I'd look for Dad's proud face in the audience. When she was too busy with her friends to help me shop for my first training bra, Dad awkwardly but lovingly took me himself. We were a perfect team. I had gotten used to our little family dynamic, Dad being both mother and father, while Mom floated in and out like some glamorous but distant relative who happened to live in our house. I was 15 when I got the call. It was a regular Thursday evening, and I was doing my homework, waiting for Dad to come home from the store. When the phone rang, I assumed it was him telling me he'd be late again. Instead, it was the police. "Is this the residence of Robert Thompson?" a serious voice asked. The next few minutes are still a blur in my memory. Drunk driver. Wrong lane. Head-on collision. No chance of survival. The words washed over me like ice water, but they didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. Dad had texted me just hours ago, asking what I wanted for dinner. Mom was out with her friends, of course. The police had to call 3 times before they reached her. When she finally came home, she was already playing the part of the devastated widow, mascara artfully smeared down her cheeks. "Oh, my poor baby," she wailed, pulling me into an awkward hug that smelled of wine and expensive perfume. "We'll get through this together." The funeral was a spectacle I'll never forget, but not because of my grief, because of my mother's performance. She wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than Dad's monthly mortgage payment, and she sobbed dramatically at all the right moments. Everyone kept telling her how strong she was, how brave. "I don't know how I'll manage," she told everyone who would listen, clutching her handkerchief. "But I have to be strong for Emily now. I'll take care of her twice as much as before." Robert would have wanted that. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone that she hadn't taken care of me at all before, so twice of nothing was still nothing. But I stayed silent, focusing instead on the real pain in my chest, the crushing reality that Dad was gone. The days after the funeral were even worse than I'd imagined. Mom's promises of increased attention lasted exactly 3 days. By day 4, she was too devastated to cook dinner. By day 5, she needed to process her grief at a spa day with her friends. By week 2, she was going on dinner dates to help her heal. I spent most of my time alone in my room, surrounded by memories of Dad. That's when Grandpa Jim, Mom's father, started coming around more often. At first, he just brought groceries and checked if I was eating. Then he started inviting me over to his house. "Emily, honey," he said one day, his kind eyes studying my face, "how about we make your dad's famous pancakes?" I think he'd want us to keep that tradition alive. That was the first time I'd smiled since Dad died. Grandpa's house became my sanctuary. While Mom was out rebuilding her life, her words, I spent afternoons with Grandpa, cooking comfort food, watching old movies, or just walking in the park near his house. "How are you really doing, kiddo?" he'd ask, actually listening to my answers. "What's on your mind today? Any plans for the weekend?" It was strange how my mother's father could be so different from her. He actually cared about my answers, remembered the names of my friends, and knew what was going on in my life. We'd spend hours in his kitchen, trying out new recipes or just talking about Dad. For the first few months after Dad's death, Mom seemed perfectly happy with our new arrangement. While I spent my time at Grandpa's house, she was free to pursue her social life without any guilt or interruption. That is, until people started talking. I overheard Mrs. Peterson from next door one day. "It's so sad," she was telling another neighbor. "That poor girl practically lives at her grandfather's house now. Helen's never home, always out with some new man." What kind of mother? That's when things changed. Mom suddenly started paying attention to where I was going and, more importantly, who knew about it. "You can't keep running to your grandfather's house every day," she snapped one evening when I was putting on my shoes to leave. "What will people think? That I can't take care of my own daughter?" I couldn't help but laugh. "But you don't take care of me, Mom. You never have." Her face turned red. "I am your mother. I've done everything for you." "Name one thing," I challenged her. "One single thing you've done for me since Dad died." She couldn't answer, of course. Instead, she banned me from visiting Grandpa, saying I needed to spend more quality time at home. Quality time apparently meant sitting alone in an empty house while she went on dates with her latest prospects. I told Grandpa about Mom's new rule during one of my banned visits. He just shook his head and sighed. "Your mother," he said, choosing his words carefully, "has always been focused on what others think of her. Not on what's real." He patted my hand. "Don't worry about her rules, Emily. You're always welcome here." Then one day, during my senior year, Mom came home practically bouncing with excitement. "I've met someone," she announced over dinner, which was rare enough to be noteworthy. "His name is George." I barely looked up from my plate. I'd heard this before, at least 5 times in the past 2 years. There was Richard the lawyer, too boring, Michael the doctor, too busy, James the business owner, too focused on work, and several others whose names I hadn't bothered to remember. "He's different," Mom insisted, noticing my lack of enthusiasm. "He's established, mature." When I finally met George, I had to bite back a laugh. He was everything Mom had always said she couldn't stand in a man: short, overweight, and at least 15 years older than her. This was the same woman who had once broken up with a guy because he was only 5 feet 11 inches. "Isn't he wonderful?" Mom gushed after he left that first night. I studied her face, trying to understand what game she was playing now. The George I'd just met was pleasant enough, but he was the complete opposite of Mom's usual type. She'd always gone for tall, athletic men who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. The kind of men who matched her carefully cultivated image. Over the next few months, I witnessed something I'd never seen before: my mother trying to actually act like a mother. The transformation was both fascinating and disturbing to watch. "Emily, sweetheart," she'd call out when George was visiting, "would you like to join us for dinner?" The first time she did this, I nearly choked on my water. In the past, whenever Mom had boyfriends over, my role was to become invisible. "Stay in your room," or "why don't you go to a friend's house," were her usual instructions. But with George, everything was different. She'd suddenly become this picture-perfect mom, asking about my day at school, pretending to help me with college applications, even making my favorite meals, or rather, ordering them from restaurants and presenting them as homemade. "Isn't it wonderful how close Emily and I are?" she'd tell George, while wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I'd have to fight the urge to shake it off, knowing this was all just another one of her performances. One evening, she actually pulled me aside before George and his family arrived. "Emily, please, act like we're close. Like we have a good relationship. Can you do that for me?" I played along, mostly out of curiosity to see how far she'd take this charade. And she took it far, all the way to my graduation day. She showed up with George and his family, wearing a tasteful designer dress and the proud smile of a mother who'd been there every step of the way. She even brought flowers and tears and hugged me in front of everyone. "My beautiful, brilliant daughter," she gushed, making sure George and his family could hear. "I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished." The day after graduation, though, the mask came off. She waited until George had left for a business trip, then called me into the living room for a talk. "Emily," she said, her voice no longer holding any of the warmth she'd displayed at graduation. "You're 18 now, and it's time for you to move out." I stared at her, thinking I must have misheard. "What?" "I'm tired of playing mother," she continued, examining her manicured nails. "You're an adult now. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I put up with you for 18 years. That's enough. I want you out of the house by tomorrow." I sat there, shocked by the sudden shift, but not entirely surprised. This was the real woman behind the mask, the one I'd known all my life. Without another word, I went upstairs and started packing. Years of living with her had taught me to expect nothing, so I'd always kept my important things ready to go. Within hours, I had everything I needed in a few bags and boxes. Grandpa opened his door before I even knocked, one look at my face telling him everything he needed to know. "Your room is ready," was all he said, helping me carry my bags inside. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He knew his daughter too well. Living with Grandpa felt like finally being able to breathe after years of holding my breath. The day after I moved in, he sat me down at his kitchen table. "Emily," he said, sliding an envelope across to me. "I want you to go to college." Inside the envelope was enough money for 4 years of tuition. When I tried to protest, he held up his hand. "Your father would have wanted this," he said firmly. "And I want this." End of discussion. So I enrolled in college, determined to make both him and Dad proud. But I couldn't just sit back and let Grandpa handle everything. Despite his comfortable retirement and generous savings, it didn't feel right to depend on him completely. That's why I picked up a job as a waitress at the Silver Spoon Cafe near campus. "You don't need to work, sweetheart," Grandpa would say whenever he saw me coming home tired from a late shift. I know, I'd reply, but I want to. The cafe job wasn't glamorous, but it gave me enough money for books, supplies, and most importantly, little gifts for Grandpa. Nothing expensive, a new coffee mug with a silly saying, a vintage record I'd find at a thrift store, his favorite cookies from the bakery across town. His face would light up every time, not because of the gifts themselves, but because he knew they came from my own earnings. Life fell into a comfortable routine. Classes during the day, work in the evenings, weekends with Grandpa. I hadn't heard from Mom in almost 3 years, and I preferred it that way. But Grandpa still kept tabs on her through family connections. "Your mother's doing well for herself," he mentioned one Sunday over breakfast. His tone was neutral, but I could sense his disapproval. New Mercedes, designer clothes, fancy jewelry. George seems to be quite generous. I pushed my eggs around my plate. Good for her. She's been telling people she's paying for your college tuition, he added quietly. Says she's been supporting you financially all this time. My fork clattered against the plate. She what? Oh yes, Grandpa continued, according to her, she's been the model of maternal support. Tells anyone who'll listen about how she's helping her daughter through college. Something about this sparked my curiosity. Mom had always been status conscious, but this level of lifestyle change seemed extreme, even for her. That evening, I did something I'd never bothered to do before. I Googled George. What I found made me nearly drop my phone. George wasn't just well off, as I'd assumed. He was George Harrison III, heir to the Harrison construction empire. His family practically owned half the state. Their name was on buildings, stadiums, and charity foundations. The smallest of their annual donations to local causes was more than what most people made in a decade. Suddenly, Mom's complete personality transformation made sense. She wasn't just fishing for a wealthy husband, she was aiming for the top of the social ladder. And somehow, she'd managed to hook one of the biggest fish in the pond. The phone call came during my junior year. Seeing Mom's number on my screen after 3 years of silence made my stomach turn. Emily, baby? Her voice had that fake sweetness I remembered so well. I need you. I almost hung up, but something in her desperate tone made me listen. The wedding is in 2 months, she continued quickly, probably afraid I'd cut her off. George's family, they're very traditional. Family values mean everything to them. I need you there. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. People have been asking questions, she went on, her voice dropping. Why doesn't your daughter visit? Why isn't she in any family photos? George's mother is particularly concerned. She keeps saying family unity is the cornerstone of their dynasty. So this is about appearances, I said flatly. No, well, not entirely. Emily, please. I'm begging you. Just come to the wedding. Show everyone we're a happy family. That's all I'm asking. My first instinct was to refuse, to tell her exactly where she could stick her invitation. But then an idea started forming in my mind. I'll come, I said. And I'm bringing Grandpa. The wedding day arrived in a blur of crystal, silk, and old money. The Harrison family had booked the most exclusive venue in the state. Watching Mom float around in her designer wedding dress, playing the role of the perfect society bride, I almost reconsidered my plan. She looked genuinely happy, greeting guests with that magnetic smile of hers, basking in the admiration of the cream of society. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt about what I was about to do. Then she spotted me. Emily, my darling daughter, she exclaimed loudly, rushing over to embrace me. The nearby guests turned to watch the touching mother-daughter reunion. I'm so happy you're here. I forgive you, sweetheart, for abandoning me all these years. I know you were just going through a phase, spending all that money I sent you for college on God knows what. I stiffened in her embrace, but she held on tighter. George approached us, beaming. Emily, I'm so glad you decided to make peace with your mother. She's been so worried about you. He turned to Mom with genuine concern in his eyes. I hope you can forgive her too. Parents and children sometimes struggle to understand each other. That was the moment I knew I had to go through with my plan. This kind man, and all these people, deserved to know the truth. I turned to the wedding coordinator. I'd like to make a speech before the ceremony, I said. A tribute to my mother. I stood at the microphone, my hands surprisingly steady. The elegant crowd turned to face me, champagne glasses in hand, expecting the usual loving daughter's pre-wedding tribute. Mom beamed from her seat of honor, George's hand in hers. I want to tell you all a story, I began, my voice clear and calm. A story about my mother, the bride. Not the version you've been told, but the truth. Mom's smile flickered slightly. 3 years ago, the day after my high school graduation, my mother called me into our living room. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to record that conversation. I pulled out my phone. I'd like to share it with you all. Before Mom could object, her own voice filled the hall. I'm tired of playing mother. You're an adult now. I want you out of the house by tomorrow. The recording continued, capturing every cruel word, every dismissive tone. The room grew deathly quiet. That was the last time I spoke to my mother until she called about this wedding. I continued into the silence. She threw me out with nothing, no warning, no support. For 3 years, she hasn't called, hasn't checked if I was alive or dead. My grandfather, her father, has been paying for my college education, providing me a home, being the parent she refused to be. Mom jumped to her feet. She's lying. Daddy, tell them she's lying. All eyes turned to Grandpa, who stood slowly from his seat. Every word my granddaughter has said is true, he said, his voice heavy with sadness. Helen, you abandoned your child. Just as you neglected her entire life, even when her father was alive. The great hall erupted in whispers. George's mother, a dignified woman in pearls, looked like she might faint. His father's face had turned to stone. Is this true? George asked Mom, his voice shaking. Did you throw your own daughter out? Abandon her? Mom's carefully constructed facade cracked. I can explain. There's nothing to explain, George cut her off, standing up. His face had transformed from confusion to disgust. You're not the woman I thought you were. You're not the woman I could ever marry. George, please, Mom pleaded, mascara running down her cheeks, real tears this time. She's lying. They're both lying. The recording doesn't lie, George said firmly. And neither does your father. He turned to address the stunned crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but there will be no wedding today. Mom crumpled into her chair, her perfect world falling apart around her. The woman who had thrown me away like garbage, to chase her dreams of wealth and status, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. 2 months after the wedding that never was, I was having Sunday breakfast with Grandpa when someone started pounding on his front door. The desperate rhythm of the knocking told me who it was, before I even heard her voice. Daddy, please, I know you're home. I need to talk to you. Grandpa and I exchanged looks across the table. He nodded slowly, and I stayed in my seat as he went to open the door. Mom burst in, designer clothes wrinkled, makeup smeared, looking nothing like the polished socialite she'd been at the failed wedding. She stopped short when she saw me, but quickly recovered, probably deciding my presence might help her case. Daddy, I'm desperate, she began, tears already flowing. This is all your fault, yours and Emily's. You've ruined everything. I watched her silently, stirring my coffee. The woman who'd thrown me out of my home was now standing here, playing victim once again. I took out a loan against the house for the wedding, she continued, pacing the kitchen. The flowers, the venue, the dress, everything was perfect. I thought once I married George, he'd help me pay it off. But now, she choked back a sob. The bank is foreclosing. I have nowhere to go. And this is our fault, how exactly? Grandpa asked quietly. If you hadn't let Emily tell those lies. They weren't lies, I interrupted, speaking for the first time. Every word was true. There's no point trying to deny it now. She whirled on me. You could have waited until after the wedding. One more day, that's all I needed. One more day and everything would have been perfect. Perfect for who, Mom? For you? While you continued to lie to everyone about being this amazing mother who supported her daughter through college? I was going to make it right, she screamed. Once I married George, I would have had the money to actually pay for your college. I could have made all the lies true. Grandpa's laugh was bitter. Listen to yourself, Helen. You're not sorry for what you did to Emily. You're only sorry you got caught. Daddy, please, she switched tactics, moving closer to him. I need help, just a loan to tide me over. I'll pay you back, I promise. I just need enough to keep the house. No, you're not getting any money from me. Not after what you did to Emily. Not after how you've lived your life. Mom's face contorted with rage. Fine, keep playing happy family with her. I hope you're both happy with what you've done to me. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That was the last time I saw her, though we heard about her through the grapevine. She lost the house, as expected. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a small real estate office, living in a tiny apartment, all her designer clothes and jewelry sold to pay debts. As for me, I graduated college last month, with honors. My first paycheck from my new job at an accounting firm went toward buying Grandpa a gorgeous vintage watch he'd been eyeing. His eyes got misty when I gave it to him. I'm saving up now for my own apartment, something close to work. Grandpa insists I can stay with him as long as I want, but I think it's time for me to stand on my own feet, my choice this time, not because someone is forcing me out. Sometimes I think about Mom, about how different things could have been if she'd just been capable of loving someone other than herself. But I've learned that you can't make someone love you, can't make them be the parent you need them to be. All you can do is cherish the people who do love you, who choose to be there for you. I'm Lillian, 42, and until last month, I thought I had my life figured out. Sure, it wasn't perfect, losing David in that horrible accident 4 years ago turned my world upside down. But I'd managed to keep moving forward. I threw myself into my marketing career at Preston & Associates, raised our daughter alone, and learned to find peace in my solitude. The house feels emptier now that Sarah's gone to college. That all changed with one phone call. I was reviewing campaign metrics for our newest client when my cell phone buzzed. Seeing my younger brother Tommy's name on the screen made me smile. He'd always been my baby brother, even though he was now 34 and married. Hey, Squirt, I answered, using my old nickname for him. Lil. His voice cracked, something was wrong. I need your help. I sat up straighter in my office chair. What's going on? The company, they filed for bankruptcy. Without warning. We all got laid off yesterday. He paused, and I could hear him struggling to maintain composure. Rachel and I, we can't afford our apartment anymore. I hate to ask this, but... My stomach tightened. Rachel. Tommy's wife of 2 years, a woman who'd made it clear at every family gathering that she thought she was too good for our middle-class family. At their wedding, she'd complained that the champagne wasn't expensive enough. We need a place to stay, Tommy continued. Just until I find another job. Please, Lil. I looked around my empty office, thinking about my empty house. Tommy was my baby brother, the one I'd helped raise when Mom went back to work. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with his math homework, defending him from bullies at school. Of course you can stay with me, I heard myself say, even as a voice in my head screamed, what about Rachel? When do you need to move in? End of the week? We have to be out of our apartment by then. After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, not really seeing it. The phone rang again, this time it was Mom. "Lillian, Tommy just told us you're letting them stay with you," she said without preamble. "That's so wonderful of you." "Mom, you remember what Rachel said at Easter, right? About how my house looked like it was decorated by a suburban housewife with no taste?" Mom sighed. "She's young, dear. She's probably matured since then. And Tommy needs this. You know how he is, he takes everything so personally. Losing his job has really shaken him." I did know. That was the problem. Tommy had always been sensitive, eager to please, desperate for approval. It was what made him such a sweet kid, and what made him completely blind to his wife's faults. "I know, Mom. That's why I said yes." After hanging up with Mom, I walked through my house, my tastelessly decorated house, and tried to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. The guest room would need fresh sheets. I'd need to clear some space in the garage for their things. And I'd need to find a way to live with Rachel without committing murder. The moving day arrived with the subtlety of a hurricane. I was working from home that morning when I heard a car door slam, followed by Tommy's voice and the click-clack of heels on my driveway. Taking a deep breath, I went to open the front door. "Lil," Tommy rushed forward to hug me, his familiar grin lighting up his face. "Thank you so much for this." Behind him, Rachel stood examining my front porch with the kind of expression usually reserved for finding gum on designer shoes. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her dark hair perfectly styled despite the moving process. "Well, at least there's plenty of space," she said by way of greeting, wheeling the first of what looked like 6 matching luxury suitcases toward the door. Tommy immediately jumped to help her, leaving me standing there wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I led them to the guest room, which I'd spent the previous weekend preparing. "It's a bit quaint," Rachel commented, running a manicured finger along the dresser. "But I suppose it'll have to do." I bit my tongue and turned to Tommy. "We should probably talk about house rules and arrangements." "I work long hours at Preston and Associates," I explained, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'm usually out by 7 and don't get back until 6 or later. I won't be able to cook or clean for you guys during the week." Rachel's head snapped up. "Cook? Clean? You expect us to do that?" "Well, yes," I replied, meeting her gaze. "You're both adults living here rent-free. I expect you to take care of yourselves." Rachel's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. "I don't cook," she announced, as if declaring she didn't juggle chainsaws. "I've never had to learn. We always ate out or had our meals delivered." I shrugged. "Well, then I guess you'll either need to learn, order takeout if you can afford it, or go hungry. I'm not running a bed and breakfast here." The weeks that followed fell into an unexpected pattern. I rarely saw them during weekdays, buried in my work at the office. When I'd come home tired and ready for some quiet time, I'd find Tommy in the kitchen, usually wearing one of my aprons, putting the finishing touches on dinner. Despite everything, it warmed my heart to see him taking charge like that. Weekends were different. I'd cook our family favorites, pot roast, chicken parmesan, Mom's famous meatloaf. Tommy would enthusiastically help and praise every dish. Rachel, however, would barely touch her food, pushing it around her plate with her fork. "We used to eat at La Maison every Sunday," she sighed one evening, eyeing my pot roast like it might bite her. "Remember that, Tommy? The chef there trained in Paris." I watched my brother's face fall slightly, but he quickly recovered, reaching for her hand. "Your cooking is great, Lil," he said loyally. "Just like Mom's." Rachel's nose wrinkled at the comparison, but I kept quiet. It wasn't my place to point out how my brother bent over backwards to accommodate her every whim, how he practically worshipped the ground she walked on while she treated him like an inconvenience. Meanwhile, watching Tommy's job search was like watching someone try to climb a mountain in roller skates. Every evening, he'd come home from another interview, his shoulders a little more slumped, his smile a little more forced. He'd throw himself into cooking dinner, as if trying to prove his worth through perfectly seasoned chicken marsala. He did eventually land a position at a smaller firm. For 2 months, things looked up. He'd leave for work in the morning with renewed purpose, and even Rachel seemed less acidic. But then came the restructuring, and Tommy was the newest hire, making him the first to go. That evening, I was working late in my home office when I heard them arguing in their room. I tried to focus on my spreadsheets, but Rachel's voice carried through the walls like poison. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "I can't believe I'm stuck living with your sister because you're such a failure. God, what was I thinking, marrying such a loser?" My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to storm in there, to tell Rachel exactly what I thought of her, to defend my baby brother. But Tommy was 34 now, not the little boy who needed his big sister to fight his battles. I forced myself to stay in my chair, my heart aching as I heard him apologizing to her. The real breaking point came a week later. I walked into my house after a particularly grueling day at work to find what looked like the aftermath of a restaurant bombing. Empty takeout containers littered every surface. Half-eaten spring rolls and pizza crusts lay abandoned on my coffee table. Sticky rings from drink glasses decorated my wooden surfaces. "What happened here?" I demanded, dropping my briefcase in shock. Rachel lounged on my couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up. "Oh, I had some friends over. We ordered lunch." "You had friends over?" I repeated slowly, feeling my blood pressure rise. "Without asking me? And left my house looking like this?" She shrugged, still not looking up. "It's not a big deal. Tommy can clean it up when he gets back from his interview." Something snapped inside me. "No, Rachel, that's not how this works. First of all, you don't invite people to someone else's house without asking permission. Second, you're not working, the least you could do is clean up after yourself." That got her attention. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? Are you suggesting I should be your maid just because you're letting us stay here? How dare you try to exploit me like this?" "Exploit you?" I laughed incredulously. "You live in my house rent-free, contribute nothing, and think basic courtesy is exploitation?" Rachel's face crumpled into tears just as Tommy walked in. Perfect timing, as always. "Baby, what's wrong?" He rushed to her side. "Your sister," Rachel sobbed dramatically, "she's trying to turn me into her personal servant. She says I have to clean everything just because we're staying here. We're guests here." "No," I corrected her, "you're family members I'm helping out. There's a difference. And family respects each other's space and property." Rachel stood up, chin raised defiantly. "I won't be treated like this. I don't clean, and that's final." I watched as Tommy silently began gathering the takeout containers, his face red with embarrassment. Part of me wanted to stop him, to force Rachel to take responsibility for once. But the defeated look in his eyes told me it would be pointless. After another failed interview, Tommy stopped cooking. He'd spend hours staring at his laptop, mechanically clicking through job listings, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. One evening, after Tommy had gone to bed early claiming a headache, I made a decision. Sitting in my car in the office parking lot, I pulled out my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in months. "Lillian?" Uncle James, David's own uncle, answered on the second ring. What a pleasant surprise. James Morrison wasn't really my uncle anymore, technically speaking, but he'd always treated me like family even after David's death. As CEO of Morrison Technologies, he'd built one of the largest tech companies in the region. "Uncle James, I need a favor," I said, explaining Tommy's situation. "He's qualified, he just needs a chance." "But," I hesitated. "If I help him directly, it'll crush what's left of his confidence." "Say no more," Uncle James replied warmly. "Send me his resume." The next evening, I casually dropped a sticky note on the kitchen counter while Tommy was cooking dinner. "Hey, I saw this job posting today," I mentioned, trying to sound nonchalant. "The position looked perfect for your background. You should give them a call." The transformation in Tommy the next morning was immediate. He wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to his wedding, newly pressed. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. "Wish me luck," he called out as he left. I waited anxiously all day, pretending to focus on work while really checking my phone every few minutes. Uncle James had promised to handle things discreetly, but I still worried something might go wrong. When I got home that evening, Tommy was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. "I got it," he announced, before I could even set down my briefcase. "They offered me the position right there in the interview. The salary is amazing, Lil. Better than my last job. We need to celebrate, I'm cooking something special tonight." As Tommy busied himself in the kitchen preparing his signature ribeye steak, Rachel sat down at the dining table, giving me a cold look. "You know, Lillian," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "you could have actually helped your brother find a job all these months. With all your connections in marketing, you could have found him something decent. But you just sat there watching him struggle. Some sister you are." She smiled smugly. "But look at him now, he did it all by himself, without your help. Proves he doesn't need you after all." I kept my face neutral as I helped Tommy set the table, letting her words roll off me. If she only knew the truth. The day Tommy and Rachel moved out was surprisingly calm. 3 months of steady paychecks had allowed them to put down a deposit on a nice apartment across town. I helped Tommy load their boxes into the moving truck, while Rachel supervised from the sidelines, tapping away on her phone. "Thanks for everything, Lil," Tommy said, hugging me awkwardly in the driveway. Rachel was already in their car, engine running, manicured fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. "Anytime, little brother," I replied, watching as he climbed into the passenger seat. Rachel pulled away without so much as a backward glance or wave goodbye. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms. The house felt emptier again, but peaceful. No more passive-aggressive comments over dinner, no more mess to clean up after Rachel's friends. I threw myself into work and weekly video calls with Sarah, who was flourishing in her final year of college. Then came Sarah's graduation. I sat in the audience, bursting with pride as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. That evening, over dinner, she told me she'd accepted a job offer in Michigan. I hugged her tight, feeling that bittersweet mix of joy and loss that seems to define parenthood. Meanwhile, Tommy's life seemed to be on an upward trajectory. At first, we talked regularly, he'd call to tell me about his successes at Morrison Technologies. But gradually, the calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. When I tried calling him, it would go straight to voicemail. Mom kept me updated during our Sunday calls. "Tommy's doing so well," she'd gush. "He just got another promotion. Rachel's been talking about them buying a house." I listened, glad that my secret intervention had worked out so well, even if it meant losing my brother in the process. Uncle James occasionally mentioned Tommy's progress too, always with a knowing look that acknowledged our shared secret. Then came the call that changed everything. I was working from home one Tuesday morning when my phone rang. It was Aunt Marie, Mom's younger sister. "Lillian, sweetheart. I'm so excited about next weekend. I just picked out the perfect gift for Tommy and Rachel's new place. That neighborhood is absolutely gorgeous, they've done so well for themselves." I felt like I'd been doused with ice water. "What housewarming party?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh," Aunt Marie's voice grew uncertain. "The one next Saturday? Didn't Tommy invite you?" "No," I said quietly. "He didn't." "But that can't be right," she continued, flustered. "You're his sister. Everyone's going, your parents, Rachel's family, even some of Tommy's colleagues from work." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, as Aunt Marie rambled on about gift registries and catering. The brother I'd helped get back on his feet, the one I'd protected since childhood, hadn't even thought to invite me to celebrate his success. My hands were shaking as I dialed Tommy's number. For once, he picked up. "Tommy, why didn't you invite me to your housewarming party?" I asked without preamble. I'm your sister, I took you in when you had nowhere else to go. The silence on the other end lasted just a moment too long. When Tommy spoke, his voice was different, cold, distant, like a stranger's. That was your duty as my sister, he said flatly. Family helps family. I don't owe you anything for doing what you were supposed to do. You're not entitled to an invitation just because you're my sister. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound, and Rachel's voice came on the line, dripping with venom. Listen here, Lillian, she spat. You're not wanted at our celebration. You never were. Did you think I forgot how you treated me while we stayed with you? How you tried to turn me into your personal maid? I never liked you, and I don't want you anywhere near our new home. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial Mom's number. Mom, my voice cracked. Did you know Tommy and Rachel didn't invite me to their housewarming? Yes, she replied, her voice unnaturally calm. We knew. And you're okay with this? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lillian, Mom sighed, maybe it's better this way. You know how Rachel feels about you, and honestly, well, you can be a bit overwhelming sometimes. It's their special day. They should celebrate with people who make them comfortable. Perhaps it's best if you don't come. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I hung up, feeling numb. Seeking some kind of explanation, I opened Facebook and went to Rachel's page. What I found there made my blood run cold. So excited for our housewarming next weekend, her post read. We've invited all the people who truly matter to us. Well, almost all, there's one person who won't be there, thank goodness. Some people just can't handle seeing others succeed after they've lorded their help over you. No negative vibes, new home, only positive people. The comments section was worse. Is this about who I think it is? That evil witch you had to live with? So glad you're free from that hell. 8 months of torture. You're so strong for surviving that. Some people think helping family makes them Mother Teresa. My hands clenched into fists as I saw the post had been shared, by Tommy, by Mom, even by Dad. Each share accompanied by supportive comments about toxic people and moving on from negativity. A week later, I arrived at the address Aunt Marie had given me. The house was impressive, a large colonial in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. Cars lined the street, all luxury brands. The front door stood open, letting out the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. I walked in, my heart pounding. The foyer opened into a spacious living room filled with people in expensive clothes, all holding champagne flutes. I recognized faces from both sides of the family, though notably, only the wealthy relatives had made the guest list. Uncle James stood near the fireplace, deep in conversation with someone. Our eyes met briefly, and we exchanged subtle nods. Lillian, Mom's harsh whisper, caught my attention. She and Dad hurried over, their faces tight with anxiety. What are you doing here? You need to leave, now. No, I said quietly, standing my ground. I won't. That's when Rachel spotted me. Her champagne glass nearly slipped from her manicured fingers. You, she shrieked, causing conversations to halt and heads to turn. How dare you come here? You weren't invited. Tommy appeared beside her, his face darkening when he saw me. The happy, sweet brother I remembered seemed completely gone, replaced by this cold stranger. What is she doing here? Rachel demanded, her voice rising hysterically. Get her out. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Aunt Marie stepped forward, her brow furrowed. Rachel, dear, this is Tommy's sister, she said diplomatically. She took you both in when you needed help. Surely. Took us in? Rachel laughed bitterly. More like imprisoned us. You don't know what it was like, living with her. She treated me like a servant, demanded I clean her house, cook her meals. She lorded it over us every single day, reminded us constantly that we were living off her charity. That's not true, I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I turned to Tommy. Tell them, Tommy. Tell them what really happened. Tell them how you did all the cooking, how I never asked Rachel to lift a finger, how. She's right, Tommy interrupted, his voice cold. You were cruel to us, Lillian. You made us feel worthless, dependent. Every day we spent in your house was hell. He gestured around the elegant room, at the expensive furniture and art pieces. Look at what I've achieved on my own, without your help. I got my job at Morrison Technologies by myself. I earned every penny that bought this house. I don't owe you anything, not gratitude, not an invitation, nothing. Tommy, I started, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. Get out of my house, he said, pointing to the door. You're not welcome here. You never will be. The tension in the room was suffocating when a quiet voice cut through the silence. That's quite enough. Uncle James stood up from his armchair by the fireplace, his presence suddenly commanding everyone's attention. I believe some introductions are in order. He walked to the center of the room, his expression stern. Most of you know me as Tom's boss, the CEO of Morrison Technologies. But there's something else you should know. He paused, looking around the room. I'm also David's uncle, Lillian's late husband's uncle. The room erupted in confused whispers. Tommy's face had gone ghostly white. I returned to the States 12 years ago, after spending decades abroad. That's why I wasn't at David and Lillian's wedding, why most of you didn't know about our connection. Uncle James's voice grew harder. But what you really need to know is that Tom didn't get his job at Morrison Technologies by himself. Lillian called me, begged me to give her brother a chance. Rachel's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. She asked me to keep it secret, Uncle James continued, his eyes fixed on Tommy. She didn't want to hurt your pride, didn't want you to feel like you needed your sister's help. She protected your ego even while you were living under her roof. Tommy started to speak, but Uncle James held up his hand. I've sat here today and listened to you insult the sister who saved you from homelessness. I've heard you lie about how she treated you, watched you humiliate her on social media, seen you turn your own parents against her. And I've heard enough. His voice turned to steel. You're fired, Tom. I won't have someone with such poor character working at my company. Rachel let out a strangled cry. But the mortgage? We just bought this house. That's not my concern, Uncle James said coldly, walking toward the door. I don't employ ungrateful people who bite the hand that feeds them. With that, he left. The room exploded into chaos. Rachel collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing hysterically about monthly payments and property values. Mom and Dad rushed to Tommy, who stood frozen in place. This is your fault. Mom turned on me, her face contorted with anger. How could you do this to your brother? Aunt Marie stepped forward. Are you serious, Helen? Your daughter helps your son get a job, keeps it secret to protect his pride, and somehow she's the villain here? Other relatives joined in, taking sides, their voices rising in argument. I'd seen enough. Without a word, I walked out of the house, leaving the chaos behind me. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Mom's voice was shrill, demanding. You have to fix this. Call James, tell him to give Tommy his job back. Your brother and Rachel are moving in with us, because they can't afford their house. This is all your fault. No, Mom, I said quietly. Tommy made his choices. He chose to believe Rachel's lies. He chose to turn against me. He chose to bite the hand that fed him. Now he can live with those choices. I hung up and blocked their numbers, Tommy's, Rachel's, even my parents'. Later, I heard through Aunt Marie that Tommy and Rachel had indeed lost the house, unable to keep up with the mortgage payments without his job at Morrison Technologies. They moved into my parents' small apartment, where Rachel apparently makes everyone miserable with her constant complaints. I still live in my quiet house, talk to Sarah every week, and have dinner with Uncle James monthly. He never expresses regret about firing Tommy, and I never ask him to reconsider. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. I never imagined I'd be writing this story, let alone living it. But life has a way of throwing curveballs that knock you flat on your back, and my pitch came one rainy Tuesday morning, 12 years ago. That's when I lost Mike, my husband, and my daughter Amy's father. The police officer's words still echo in my head sometimes. "Mrs. Thompson, there's been an accident. A drunk driver had run a red light," they said. Mike never had a chance. I'm Karen, and at 32, I became a widow with a 9-year-old daughter to raise. The first few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, casseroles from neighbors, and trying to explain to Amy why Daddy wasn't coming home. The financial reality hit hard and fast. Even with Mike's life insurance, keeping up with the utilities and house bills in our home, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother before we got married, wasn't easy. I'd been working part-time as a project coordinator, but suddenly that wasn't enough. Thank God for Mike's parents, Sarah and Robert. They stepped in like angels when I was drowning in grief and responsibilities. I remember the first time Sarah showed up at our door with groceries and Amy's school supplies. "Karen, honey," she said, hugging me tight, "you're not alone in this. You're still our daughter, and we're here for both of you." Robert would pick Amy up from school 3 days a week, helping her with homework while I worked extra hours. They'd slip me money whenever they could, though I always felt guilty taking it. "You need to think about yourself too," Sarah would say during our Sunday dinners. "You're still young, Karen. Maybe dating." But I'd shake my head before she could finish. "I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be ready." The truth was, Mike wasn't just my husband, he was my high school sweetheart, my first and only love. The thought of replacing him felt like betraying his memory. Instead, I threw myself into being both mother and father to Amy. We developed our own little routines: Saturday morning pancakes, homework sessions at the kitchen table, and bedtime stories where we'd make up adventures about a brave princess who looked suspiciously like Amy. But late at night, when Amy was asleep, I'd sit in my bedroom, looking at old photos and wondering if I was doing enough. The house felt so empty without Mike's loud laugh, his horrible singing in the shower, even his socks that never quite made it to the hamper. As Amy entered her teenage years, I found myself at a crossroads in my career. My boss, Linda, called me into her office one spring morning. "Karen, we've got some challenging projects coming up. Higher stakes, bigger budgets. I think you're ready for them." She slid a folder across her desk. "It'll mean some travel, though." I hesitated, thinking of Amy. "I don't know, Linda. My daughter. Your in-laws are still around, right?" She leaned forward. "Karen, your daughter's 13 now. It's time you started thinking about your career too." The projects were challenging, but exhilarating. Each successful completion brought new opportunities, and my income grew steadily. I still remember Amy's face when I came home from my first business trip. "Mom, you look different," she said, studying me. "More, I don't know, alive?" She was right. I felt alive again, not just surviving, but thriving. The years flew by in a blur of project deadlines, parent-teacher conferences, and weekend visits with the in-laws. Before I knew it, Amy was graduating high school. "Mom, I got in," she screamed over the phone one day. "University of Michigan. Can you believe it?" My heart sank and soared simultaneously. Michigan was 3 states away, but Amy's voice was so full of excitement. "That's wonderful, sweetie. We'll make it work." The day we dropped her off at college, I cried all the way home. But then something unexpected happened. I started to enjoy the quiet. For the first time in years, I could focus on myself. I cut back my hours at work, hired a contractor to renovate the kitchen I'd been complaining about for years, and planted the garden I'd always dreamed of. Amy and I kept in touch through regular Skype calls. "Mom, you won't believe what happened in chemistry today," or "Mom, the cafeteria food is terrible." I watched through my computer screen as my little girl grew into a confident young woman. Her graduation day was perfect, sunny, but not too hot. Sarah and Robert sat beside me, all of us beaming with pride as Amy crossed the stage. "I'm staying here, Mom," she announced over dinner that evening. "I've got a job offer at a marketing firm." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. But maybe this was better. She was building her own life, just as I had built mine. 2 years later, Amy showed up on my doorstep with a tall, handsome man named James. "Mom, we're getting engaged," she squealed, flashing a diamond ring. I was ecstatic. Robert and I immediately offered to help with the wedding expenses. But as the plans grew more elaborate, so did the costs. Each week brought new requests: designer dress, luxury venue, exotic flowers, premium catering. "Honey," I said gently one evening during a particularly expensive cake tasting, "maybe we should consider something a bit more modest?" Amy's eyes immediately welled up with tears. "But Mom, you should see Melissa's wedding photos on Instagram. And Rachel's reception was in that beautiful vineyard. I can't be the only one with a basic wedding." I looked at my daughter's pleading face and felt my resolve crumble. What was money compared to her happiness? So I dipped into my savings again, and the wedding was everything she'd dreamed of: a fairy tale celebration in Michigan complete with ice sculptures and a 7-tier cake. After the extravaganza of Amy's wedding, my bank account needed recovery time, and honestly, so did I. The house felt serene again, and I settled back into my routine. Then, 6 months after the wedding, Amy called. "Mom, we're coming to visit this weekend. We have something exciting to discuss." That Sunday morning, I was making coffee when they arrived. "Mom, you won't believe what we're planning," Amy exclaimed, settling onto our kitchen bar stool. Her eyes were sparkling with that same look she used to get when asking for a new toy as a child. "We're going to open our own business," James announced proudly. "An auto parts store." I poured them coffee, nodding encouragingly. "That's interesting. Tell me more about your plans." "Well," Amy leaned forward, "we found the perfect location. It's in a great area with lots of traffic. We just need some startup capital." When Amy named the figure, I literally choked on my coffee, splattering some onto the counter. "You're joking, right?" "Mom, it's a solid investment." Amy's voice took on that wheedling tone I remembered from her teenage years. "The location alone." "Have you done any market research?" I interrupted, wiping up the spilled coffee. "What's your business plan?" "We don't need all that." Amy waved her hand dismissively. "Mom, we know what we're doing. I have a business degree, remember?" "A marketing degree," I corrected. "And James, what's your experience with auto parts?" "I've always been interested in cars," he mumbled. "Look," Amy's voice hardened, "I'm your only heir. Everything you have will be mine eventually anyway. Why not help me now when I actually need it?" The coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. I slowly set it down, feeling a cold anger I'd never experienced before with my daughter. "First of all," I said carefully, measuring each word, "being my heir doesn't entitle you to my money while I'm alive. Second, I haven't seen a single piece of paper showing me this is a viable business. No market analysis, no financial projections, nothing." "Come on, James," Amy grabbed her purse. "We're leaving." Obviously, Mom cares more about her money than her only daughter's happiness. They stormed out, the door slamming behind them. I sat there for a long time, staring at their untouched coffee cups. Weeks passed without a word from Amy. Then I saw it on Facebook, photos of a storefront with a grand opening banner. "Dreams do come true," Amy's post read. "So grateful we could secure a business loan to make this happen. Entrepreneurs, business owners." More posts followed, Amy behind the counter, James arranging displays, both of them smiling in front of fully stocked shelves. Then came the vacation photos, Amy and James on a Hawaiian beach, cocktails in hand. When hard work pays off. Business success, living our best life. Then the tone of the post started to change. The photos became less flashy, the captions less boastful. Business photos disappeared entirely, replaced by vague inspirational quotes about learning from challenges and staying strong through storms. Finally, 6 months after their grand opening, Amy posted a long message: "Life doesn't always go as planned. Sometimes you have to know when to close one door so another can open." Today we're announcing the closure of Thompson Auto Parts. Thank you to all our customers who supported us on this journey. New Beginnings Life Lessons. The doorbell rang on a chilly October evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I muted the TV and approached cautiously. Through the peephole, I saw Amy and James, looking nothing like the confident entrepreneurs from their Hawaii photos. When I opened the door, Amy burst into tears. James stood behind her, staring at his shoes. "Mom," Amy's voice cracked. "We need help. We lost everything," James finally spoke. "The business loan, we can't even make rent anymore." Over cups of hot tea, they laid out their situation. The business loan was massive, their credit was destroyed, and they couldn't afford even a basic apartment. They'd been staying with friends, bouncing between couches. Could we stay here for a while?" Amy asked, her voice small. "Just until we get back on our feet." I took a deep breath. "Yes, but we need to set some ground rules." They nodded eagerly, relief washing over their faces. I helped them move into the guest room the next day, and our new life began. I started taking on extra projects at work, knowing I had 2 more mouths to feed. My usual 8-hour days stretched into 10, sometimes 12. Both Amy and James found jobs. She had a local marketing firm, he had an auto repair shop, but their salaries barely covered their loan payments. To my surprise, Amy stepped up at home. She'd have dinner ready when I got home late, the kitchen clean and tidy. For a while, it seemed to work. We fell into a routine, James and Amy leaving early for their jobs, me working late, coming home to a warm meal and a clean house. Then Linda, my boss of 15 years, called me into her office. "Karen, I'm leaving the company," she said without preamble. "I wanted you to hear it from me first. The new director starts next week. Between us, he's got his own way of doing things. Be careful." She was right. The new director, Mr. Peterson, swept in like a cold wind. Suddenly there were new procedures, new reporting structures, new faces in management positions. I watched as, one by one, Linda's old team members were either pushed out or left voluntarily. The atmosphere grew tense, with whispered conversations in break rooms and worried glances in hallways. Then, 2 months after Linda left, I got the email, "Please see Mr. Peterson at 2 p.m. I knew before I even sat down in his chrome and leather office. The rehearsed speech, the fake sympathy in his voice, I'd seen it all before, just never from this side of the desk. "We're restructuring the department," he said smoothly. "Your position has been eliminated." I sat there, numb, thinking about Amy and James at home, about the increased grocery bills, about the utilities that had doubled since they moved in. How was I going to tell them? That evening, I sat at our kitchen table, still in my work clothes, staring at my hands. Amy and James were across from me, their dinner plates pushed aside. "I've been let go," I said quietly. "The new director, he's restructuring the department." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked up to catch them exchanging a quick glance. Was that panic in their eyes? That night, I lay awake making plans. First order of business, budget cuts. No more takeout, no more premium brands, no more extras. We'd need to tighten our belts until I found new employment. The first signs of trouble appeared at breakfast 2 weeks later. Amy stared at the store brand cereal box like it had personally offended her. "Really, Mom? What happened to the good stuff?" "We need to be careful with money right now," I explained. "It's temporary." James pushed his bowl away. "I can't eat this. It tastes like cardboard." That evening, I made a simple casserole instead of ordering our usual Friday night Chinese. Amy took one bite and dropped her fork with a clatter. "This is what we're eating now?" She looked at James. Honey, maybe we should just grab something on our way home tomorrow. You're welcome to buy your own groceries, I said evenly. The atmosphere in the house changed after that. Instead of coming home to cooked meals, I found dirty dishes in the sink and empty takeout containers in the trash. Clearly, they were buying their own food now. One evening, as I was cooking dinner for myself, Amy leaned against the counter. You know, Mom, it's kind of weird having you home all the time, she said. James and I used to have the house to ourselves in the evenings. I turned from the stove. This is my house, Amy. Yeah, but, she waved her hand vaguely. Don't you have job applications to do or something? The criticisms became constant. If I cleaned, I was moving their things. If I watched TV in the living room, I was always around. If I cooked, the smell was overwhelming. Then came that Wednesday afternoon. I was heading to the laundry room when I heard whispers from the guest bedroom. I shouldn't have stopped, shouldn't have listened, but something in their tone made me pause. We need to figure out how to get her out, James was saying. She's just sitting around all day, eating our food. I know, Amy replied. She's become such a freeloader. At least when she was working, she was useful. I stood there, frozen, my laundry basket pressing against my hip. My own daughter, plotting to push me out of my own house. The same house where I'd raised her, where I'd held her through thunderstorms and teenage heartbreaks, where I'd kept her safe after losing her father. Quietly, I turned and walked back to my room. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I sat at my desk and powered up my phone's voice recorder app. Something told me I might need evidence of their conversations. The tension finally broke over a pot roast dinner I'd made. Amy pushed her plate away and cleared her throat dramatically. Mom, we need to talk about the living situation, she announced, exchanging glances with James. We'd been thinking. It's just that, well, James and I are working, and you're. She paused, choosing her words, not contributing right now. James nodded encouragingly at her. Maybe it would be better if you stayed with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, Amy continued, her voice sickly sweet. They have that spare room, and we could handle things here. I stared at my daughter, barely recognizing the person she'd become. Let me be very clear. This is my house. I took you both in when you had nowhere to go. If you're unhappy with the arrangement, you're welcome to leave. Amy's face flushed red. You're being selfish, she shouted, shoving back from the table. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. Yes, we are, I agreed quietly. Funny how you only remember that when you need something from me. She stormed off to her room, James trailing behind her like a shadow. After that night, the house became a war zone of silence. They started buying their own groceries, labeling everything in the fridge with passive-aggressive sticky notes. Amy and James only, do not touch. I'm not feeding a freeloader, Amy would announce loudly whenever she cooked, making sure I could hear from the next room. Some people should learn to support themselves. I said nothing. Instead, I kept my phone handy, recording their cruel comments and whispered plots. The evidence was building, though I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it. Then, during one of my morning walks 2 weeks later, the only peace I found these days, my phone rang. It was Linda, my former boss. Karen, got a minute? I've started my own consulting firm. Listen, I need a chief project manager, and you're the only person I trust for the job. Interested? My heart skipped a beat. What's the salary range? When she named the figure, I had to sit down on a nearby bench. It was substantially more than my previous position. We need someone to start immediately, Linda continued. The office is all set up. Can you come by tomorrow morning? Yes, I said, without hesitation. Yes, I can. I didn't breathe a word to Amy or James that evening. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit and drove to the address Linda had given me. The office was beautiful, all glass and modern furnishings. Linda greeted me with a hug and showed me to my new office. My office. With a window view and my name on the door. "Welcome aboard," she smiled, handing me the contract. I signed immediately, my hand steady and sure. Driving home that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. An hour later, I stood on my own front porch, key in hand, staring at the lock in disbelief. They'd actually changed the locks. My hand trembled as I knocked on the door. The door opened, and there they stood, Amy and James, blocking the entrance like bouncers at a club. "You're not welcome here anymore," Amy said coldly. "We've had enough of your freeloading." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Freeloading? In my own house?" "Your house?" James scoffed. "You don't contribute anything anymore. You just sit around all day while we work." "Amy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "have you forgotten that I took you in when your business failed? When you had nothing?" She shrugged, and the gesture was so dismissive it made my heart ache. "Yeah, well, that was different. You had money then, so you were worth respecting. Now?" She looked me up and down. "You're just taking up space." Before I could respond, Amy slammed the door in my face. I stood there, my hand still raised, as if frozen in time. 25 years of motherhood, of sacrifice, of love, and this was what it had come to. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers, one older with graying temples, one younger with kind eyes. I explained the situation, showing them the property documents I thankfully kept in my car. When they rang the doorbell, Amy answered with her sweet, innocent face, the one I'd seen her use countless times to get out of trouble. "Officers, there seems to be a misunderstanding," she began. "Step aside, ma'am," the older officer said firmly. "We need to let the legal owner enter her property." I walked in, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors my grandmother had loved so much. "This is ridiculous." Amy's voice rose. "I have rights. This was my father's house." I pulled out the property deed. "No, Amy. This house was given to me by my grandmother, before I even met your father. It was never his, and it's certainly not yours." But, her face crumpled. "Where are we supposed to go? We have nowhere else." For a moment, I saw my little girl again, the one who'd come to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. But then I remembered the recordings on my phone, the cruel words, the changed locks. "That's not my problem anymore," I said quietly. "You didn't care where I would go when you locked me out. Pack your things and leave." "Mom, please." Amy started crying, but I'd seen this performance before. "Officers," I turned to the police, "could you please ensure they leave the premises?" They nodded, and I stood in my living room, watching as Amy and James stuffed their belongings into suitcases, all while Amy alternated between crying and glaring at me. Finally, they were gone. I locked the door behind them, then immediately picked up my phone. "Hello, yes, I need a locksmith. Emergency service, please. I need all the locks changed tonight." As I waited for the locksmith, I walked through my house, straightening pictures, touching familiar surfaces. My house. My grandmother's house. The one thing I'd never let anyone take from me, not even my own daughter. Life settled into a new rhythm. My job at Linda's company was challenging and rewarding, and I threw myself into the work. Coming home to an empty house wasn't easy, but at least it was peaceful. Then Sarah called. "Karen?" Her voice sounded strained. "We need to talk. Amy and James showed up at our door last night. They're saying horrible things about you. That you cruelly threw them out, that you're selfish." I took a deep breath. "Sarah, there's something you need to hear." I played the recording over the phone. Amy and James's voices came through clearly. "Once your grandparents kick the bucket, we'll get their house too," James was saying. "I know," Amy replied. "They're getting so old now. Hopefully it won't take too long. That neighborhood's worth a fortune." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. 2 days later, Sarah called back. Her voice was stronger this time. "We told them no," she said. You should have seen Amy's face when we said we knew about their plans for our house. They left in quite a state. Are you okay? I asked. We will be. Robert and we've been talking. We're updating our will. Everything's going to you, Karen. You've been more of a daughter to us than Amy's been a granddaughter. Months passed. I settled into my new position, even earned a company award for a particularly successful project. Then one day, a Facebook message popped up. Amy. Mom, I heard about your new job. Congratulations. Listen, James and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We realize we behaved terribly. We've changed, I promise. Could we come home? We'll be different this time. I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, the teenager who rolled her eyes but still kissed me goodnight, the bride who'd looked so beautiful in her wedding dress. But I also remembered the cruel words, the changed locks, the calculated plots against her own grandparents. Amy, I wrote back, I don't believe you've changed. I think you've just run out of options. You need to solve your own problems now. I'll always be your mother, but I can't be your safety net anymore. She didn't respond. That was a year ago. Sometimes I drive past places that hold memories, her old school, the park where she learned to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we celebrated every report card. I wonder if she thinks about those times too. Sarah and Robert come over for Sunday dinners now. We talk about Amy sometimes, wondering where she is, hoping she's okay. They've officially changed their will, as they said they would. You'll know what's right when the time comes, Sarah told me, squeezing my hand. The truth is, I do still hope for reconciliation someday. Not the quick fix Amy proposed in her message, but a real healing. One based on honest conversations, genuine remorse, and true change. Until then, I focus on my work, tend to my garden, and care for Sarah and Robert as they cared for me all those years ago.